Shana Tova. Why be Jewish? 3 words and a question mark startled and surprised me. My classmate had just asked our entire community of rabbinic students and faculty this shocking question. At first, I wasn't sure I heard him correctly. Why be Jewish? Aren't we in rabbinical school? What kind of question is that? I had never been asked so directly why I was Jewish. And to be fair, it may seem like a bizarre question to many of you too. But this year, this is the question that the shofar calls us all to answer with vigor, creativity, and imagination. Now, some of you might argue that you didn't choose to be Jewish. I was born Jewish. There was no choice involved. You respond that you're Jewish because your parents were Jewish and your grandparents before them. Being Jewish is just part of your religious and cultural heritage that you never chose, much like you never chose your eye color or your place of birth. And if you became Jewish through conversion, of course, you might have a different answer. After all, converting to Judaism typically requires a lengthy process of learning and self-discovery before ever you set foot in the immersive waters of the mikvah. You observed holidays and tried out new rituals. You spoke with many people, possibly including bewildered family members, and definitely including long-winded rabbis. And after all that, you still decided to commit yourself to Judaism. So I would imagine you could articulate why. And regardless of whether you have Jewish ancestry, you might respond to the question, why be Jewish, by sharing that you want to ensure the survival of Jews and Judaism. You root for us as an underdog of history, as the perpetual survivors of persecution. And that response is what Emil Fackenheim, the 20th century philosopher, calls the 614th commandment, not to hand Hitler a posthumous victory. And of course, that may resonate with many of you. But my friends, as true as any of these answers may be, that you were born Jewish, or engaged in a long process of conversion, or that you care about our survival, none of them are enough if we can't articulate why Judaism should survive. Whatever Jewish journey has led you to this room tonight, make no mistake about it. We are all Jews by choice. Think about it. Instead of being anywhere else on this Sunday night, you chose to bring in the Jewish New Year. You chose to reconnect with community and with the spirit of the universe.
Thank you.
But I'm guessing that many of you didn't stop to ask yourselves, why be Jewish? You see, my classmate suggested that answering this question requires us to state the value proposition for being Jewish. The business world uses value propositions to describe the value that customers get when purchasing a good or service. Applied here to Judaism, it refers to the value that being Jewish and doing Jewish can bring to our lives. And while I don't usually like to think of Judaism as something to be consumed or transacted in, the fact of the matter is that our communities and institutions have a lot of competition in American society today. So we must be able to advocate for and demonstrate the meaning and value that Judaism brings to our lives and to the world. Don't worry. In a few minutes, I am going to share with you 3 of my answers to the question, why be Jewish? Because the stakes are too high to obfuscate or engage in that classic rabbinic practice of answering a question with another question. But before I do, I want to recognize that some of you may still not quite agree that we have a choice. You think, Jews haven't always had a choice about being Jewish. You think, we've always been a persecuted minority, kicked out of nearly every country we've ever lived in. Who would choose such a thing? And sadly, you can read our history this way. We need look no further than the horrors of the 20th century. It's true, the Nazis did not care how one defined herself. Anyone with a Jewish grandparent was a Jew, whether they practiced Judaism or not. Our people were the targets of hatred and violence merely because of our heritage. And I acknowledge that today in the United States, this argument may even deserve new scrutiny, as we have seen a resurgence in anti-Semitism casting a long, dark shadow on our ability to choose our Jewishness. But there's another way to read our history too. Because being Jewish, practicing Judaism, and using it to bring meaning to our lives has always required a choice. In the time of the Maccabees, many Israelites took Greek names and customs as their own, effectively converting out. In the Middle Ages, later during the Spanish Inquisition, many chose conversion out of Judaism, rather than risking their lives to maintain Jewish practices. So those who did maintain their customs most certainly chose Judaism. Our sacred texts also insist on our need to choose, even when it comes to choosing Torah. You see, the logic goes that if we hadn't chosen the covenant, we would have no incentive to keep it. You don't stay in relationships that you didn't choose in the first place. One Talmudic tale even suggests that the Israelites were coerced, but the rabbi's response reveals just how highly they valued our freedom to choose. Newly freed from Egypt, we wandered through the desert to our first stop at Sinai. But the revelation at Sinai describes a terrifying scene. Our leader had to ascend the mountain, which itself was surrounded by lightning and thunder, not at all like this mountain. Clouds and even the sound of the shofar. And the text states that when Moses took us to the mountain, we stood betachtit hahar, literally underneath the mountain. With such frightening images, one rabbi taught that this phrase, underneath the mountain, meant that God held the mountain itself literally over our heads, coercing us to accept the covenant or accept the grave. Sounds like an offer we couldn't refuse. But even that appearance of coercion leads the very same passage to continue that in the time of Esther, our people willingly and freely accepted the covenant once again. We once again chose to be Jewish. And today, here in the United States, we have more choice than ever in history. We live in a time and place of unprecedented fluidity and flexibility in religious identity. 5 years ago, when the Pew Research Center published its landmark survey of Jewish American identity, it found that among Jews born after 1980, some 30% of them identified as Jews of no religion. But the very same study reminds us that that shift in Jewish self-identification reflects broader changes in the U.S. public as a whole. Americans increasingly forgo any religious affiliation. Now, these Jews of no religion might identify as spiritual but not religious, or they might embrace their cultural heritage, you know, the one which leads them to crave matzo ball soup on Passover and Chinese food on Christmas. But effectively, they're not choosing Judaism. So for us, Jews by choice, who believe that Judaism should not only survive, but can in fact thrive in the 21st century, we must return to the question, however uncomfortable it may be, why be Jewish? What is the value proposition for Judaism in the contemporary world? Only by answering this question for ourselves will we be able to advocate for the survival of Judaism or any given Jewish institution, including our very own Kol Ami? So without further delay, here are 3 of my responses to the question. First, Judaism helps me create holiness in time. From the very first chapter of Torah, our sacred text gives meaning and order to time. Our creation myth describes an order of days, which we know are really epics of creation. But they lead to God blessing time itself and resting on the first Shabbat. In turn, our practice of Shabbat and our cycle of holidays reflect this process. Our holy times and seasons offer us the chance to appreciate the spark of divinity in our creating, our making, our doing. But they also remind us to pause and focus our time on being. Compare this with American culture today. We work and work and work, rarely resting. We take fewer vacation days than most other developed nations of the world. We are continually pushed to produce deliverables and to quantify every minute we've put into the job. We're so busy with doing and making and producing that we all too often forget to focus on being. So Judaism offers a powerful antidote. Make time holy. Recognize its finite nature and refuse to take it for granted. Our time on this earth is limited, but do not despair. We celebrate and choose life by marking holiness in the passage of our precious time on this planet. In his classic work, The Sabbath, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel puts it this way: Judaism is a religion of time, aiming at the sanctification of time. There are no 2 hours alike. Every hour is unique and endlessly precious. We don't need to feel lonely or rudderless as we navigate the waves of life in search of purpose and direction. Our sacred times and seasons offer us a compass, helping us actively create meaning as we sail the ocean of our lives. So why be Jewish? Because Judaism helps me create holiness in time. The second value proposition I offer tonight is that Judaism insists that we question and interpret. Our struggles and questioning of God are even built into one of our names, Yisrael. In a moment of solitude and fear, Jacob found himself alone, wrestling with a strange figure who blesses him with the name Yisrael, because he has struggled with God and with people. But questioning God is just the beginning. We're the people of the Talmud, a text that's more interested in good questions than answers. Our tradition has long wondered about the gaps in our holy texts, and those musings and ponderings led to interpretations, to the development of new texts and traditions. Some of our most cherished historical figures, from Maimonides to Einstein, propelled questions and critical thinking as the way to improve ourselves and the world around us. But the culture we live in prides itself on knowledge, on always being right. We are often afraid to ask questions if we think we ought to know the answer already. We seclude ourselves in ideological silos, in bubbles that reinforce our pre-existing biases and ideas. It has become rare to even interact with, let alone have a meaningful conversation with people who think differently than we do. But our sacred tradition calls us to question what we know, to challenge our assumptions, and sharpen our minds to help improve the world around us. So, why be Jewish? Because Judaism insists that we question and interpret. My third answer may be the most fundamental of all. Judaism requires strong relationships. Our tradition cannot be practiced alone. Of course, we do value each and every human being, each one created in the divine image, each one infinitely precious, a world unto themselves. Yet Judaism insists that when we build relationships with one another, we bring the divine presence with us. We become something greater. And sadly, this value too is all too often lacking in American society today. Everything caters to the individual. Everything becomes a customizable commodity delivered at the precise time and the precise quantity you need. It's pretty convenient, I'll admit, but it's also pretty isolating. Social media is perhaps the biggest culprit. The culture of social media teaches us to express ourselves, to brand ourselves, to hope we go viral. It does not teach us to listen to others, to look into the face of the person next to you, to hear their story, to love your neighbor. So for a third time, why be Jewish? Because Judaism requires strong relationships. In a society where we are often tempted to go it alone, Judaism reminds us to double down on relationships and community. Those are three of my value propositions for Judaism, boiled down to a sweet, simple syrup. 1, Judaism helps me create holiness in time. 2, Judaism insists that we question and interpret. 3, Judaism requires strong relationships. Our tradition offers a unique approach to each of these, and throughout the generations, our ancestors propelled Judaism to survive not just for survival's sake, but because they knew that our sacred tradition contained such powerful ideas. This year, I imagine a world where we take these values along with our own answer and recommit to choosing Judaism. I imagine a community built from these foundations in which all of us are able to answer, why be Jewish? With confidence and pride. These very values, you see, have already guided me in my work with the Open Yad Project. As some of you know, one of my roles as your assistant rabbi has been to launch this program for building community amongst folks in our 20s, 30s, and 40s in West Hollywood, and on the East Side. From the beginning of my rabbinic internship 2 years ago, though, when Rabbi Egger first charged me with focusing on this kind of engagement, we knew that in order to build something meaningful and sustainable, it had to start with the most basic building block of community: strong relationships. That process takes time. It takes attention to the rhythms of our lives and concern for the seasons in the lives of others. But what's more, over the past several months, as we've organized and officially launched our efforts as the Open Yad Project, we've used these values of marking a holiness in time and the importance of questioning to guide the development of our programs. Last month, for instance, we hosted our first Havdalah event in what we hope will become a monthly spiritual experience. The only purpose of Havdalah, though, is to mark the passage from one moment to the next. Havdalah literally means separation, because it separates between two moments in time. It marks the passage from a Shabbat of being and rest back into our busy work week of doing and making. So in choosing to use Havdalah as our signature program, we're demonstrating that uniquely powerful way that Judaism marks holiness in time. Similarly, with the importance of questioning, we're hoping to launch a series of pop-up learning events in October. While these programs will aim to extend an open hand, literally an open yad, to new prospective community members, the concept grows naturally from that cycle of questioning, wondering, and reshaping our world in response to those questions. The further I go along this path of building community, and developing the Open Yad project, the more grateful I am that I have stopped to ask myself, why be Jewish? Because when we ask ourselves that question, we give ourselves permission to imagine new answers, and to imagine ourselves and our world transformed by the beauty and wisdom of our sacred tradition. As we usher in this new year, I pray that you too will ask yourselves, why be Jewish? I hope that you will explore your own answers to this vital question, and I hope that your presence here tonight will be the first choice in recommitting for yourselves and for this community to choose Judaism, to choose the ways that our sacred tradition will bring meaning and transformation to your lives. Yes, I hope that Judaism and the Jewish people survive. And I believe that we work towards that vision when we remind ourselves and our loved ones why we ought to survive. As we bring in this new year, 5779, we recommit to passing our tradition, Lidor Vador, from one generation to the next. And let us do that by responding with certainty, with love, with patience, and with imagination when we ask each other, why